Welcome to the V2V podcast. My name is Marcus. Some people call me Aurelius, and this is another edition of the Survivor series of interviews. Today, my guest is Mel Grrster, who is indeed a survivor and also an anthropologist from Utah. And she's going to talk to us a little bit about what the troubled teen industry is in general, and more specifically talk a little bit about her experiences in the program. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. So did you want me to just jump in?
So what in your perspective, in your estimation, from your perspective, is, in a broad sense, what is the troubled teen industry?
Well, I've actually never even heard this term until recently, so I'm really grateful for it. I learned about it through the memes page online, the Troubled Teens page, and the other survivors group that I've recently encountered. But, before, I never really had a term to call it. What would I call that experience that I had, and what was my teenage years? And so in the past, I would say, I was in juvie, but it was not really juvie because it was private. Or I would say I went to child prison because I was kind of it kind of captured the gravity of the situation and how punitive it was. But I think the troubled teen industry, that's a great term because it captures the fact that it is it's an economic machine. It's an industry. Where wealthy, middle-class, very affluent parents are able to pawn off their kids on other people. And, it's very lucrative. There's very little oversight. So you've got a lot of places in Utah or rural areas, where they've got the wilderness programs. You've got residential treatment centers, therapeutic boarding schools. Whatever. There's all kinds of things, but they amount to restrictive total institutions where young people are cut off from society and their parents are paying for it. And, they differ, I'm sure, on the degree of punishment that goes on there, but that's about that. So I really like the term. Thanks for popularizing it.
Oh, you're very welcome. That is interesting because if you don't have the words to kind of define your experience and you tell people that that you were in juvie or a child prison, immediately my mind
stigmatized
goes to right, you become criminalized, what did you do wrong? What did you do to deserve that? And that's not, in some sense that's accurate. You were essentially imprisoned
right.
without resources to leave with, or even the right to leave in any case, because of the consent forms that the adults sign to basically put you into this program's care, where the parental rights aren't exactly stripped, but the program is given license to do kind of whatever they feel is necessary in order to, quote unquote, fix you.
Right.
And it is expensive, for sure. A lot of
and the prices have gone up. I know that the first time, when I was first locked up when I was 13, it was $3,000 a month, and then when I ended up getting sent back because it obviously didn't work the first time. And it was up to $5,000 or $6,000 a month, So, I had a trust fund, when I was a kid, but that all got spent, on that. So
there are some places now that cost $2,000 a day.
Wow. That is amazing.
Yeah.
You would have to be wicked rich for that.
Right. Because most insurance policies, some do actually though, cover those kinds of expenses.
Mm-hmm.
The insurance industry itself is an entirely different topic, but they can make payouts like that because of the way that insurance works. It's it's a big gamble.
I didn't even know the insurance industry was involved, so this is even more an industry than I thought. So, okay, interesting.
Oh, sure. Right, because especially the more quote unquote therapeutic programs or pseudo medical programs, it's similar in a sense to adult rehabilitation, which insurance does cover in most cases, and those are also very expensive, like literally $50,000 to $100,000 a month at times. And
right. And
the insurance company can afford it. The insurance company can afford it because of the gamble they make that if everybody's kind of paying into this pool, even those giant payouts are a mere fraction of what they're taking in. So they can afford it because it doesn't cut into their profit at all, really. And it's kind of mind-blowing, but that is indeed the case because they're dealing with so many people that even millions of dollars going out doesn't even touch the billions of dollars that are coming in. But in a lot of cases, it's self-pay, and so you have to be right. So you have to be of some means to be able to send your kid away anyway. I'm sure there are cut rates.
It's a brilliant economic scheme, though, because it's like the overhead for these kind of places is so low. Like, for example, the place where I went was on a piece of land in northeastern Utah on top of abandoned oil wells, and like they just stuck a few double wide trailers, and then kids built geodesic domes, and like, I mean, you pay people like minimum wage, and there's no like real teachers or like real, like you don't get medical care, you don't really get any therapeutics at all. You're basically just having kids build a farm for you, you know, like it's amazing, like just a cash cow basically. So. Yeah.
Right. There was just an article last week in BuzzFeed about a what's it called, Riverview Christian Academy in Temecula, California, and they admitted in print that there was really nobody, and continues to really be nobody on staff who's certified in the field that they're operating in. Like the teachers aren't really teachers. The nurses aren't really nurses. And it's amazing that they can be that blatant and say this stuff and still remain in operation. That may be changing for them. We'll see.
I would certainly hope so. They were quite candid in that piece. So, I mean, yeah, I was surprised they were that honest as well because, I mean, at least at the place I went, they would never admit that sort of thing.
Right, and that's not uncommon.
Yeah.
In fact, there was another article, the one about the place in New York where, unfortunately, 100 plus former residents over the years have died, either from suicide or drug overdoses. There was, and I'm not going to mention her name. And just out of respect, because this poor woman lost her son too. But she was a special education teacher who got enticed to join staff, saw some really brutal stuff like kids wrapped in rugs, bound with duct tape, remained, and then enrolled her son.
That was really shocking to me too when I read that.
Right, and then there was a little bit later in the article it explained that she had become the de facto nurse, but this woman was not a nurse. She was just acting as such. And it's just, it's sad, and it's really confusing to you in a sense that this kind of thing is at all allowable, even on a state-by-state basis, because I know that's how generally these programs are kind of administered, or if you even want to call it that, the guidelines are imposed by each individual state. It's not in any way a national thing.
Right.
So let's talk a little bit about your personal experience, if that's okay.
Oh, yeah, that's fine. I listened to your show from yesterday, and I thought it was interesting how you guys were taking it back to the 1980s. And so I'm not that old. So, I mean, it was actually almost 20 years ago that I was sent away. You know, so it was 1998. So it was kind of different. It was a lot of what you were talking about yesterday in terms of, like, you know, the broader social context in terms of, like, you know, this, like, moral panic about the troubled teen. You know, I mean, it was right before Columbine happened. I mean, it
Right.
seemed like, you know, and then we had the internet, right? So, like, I think that was the big thing, that parents didn't really know what to do and the kids are out of control or something. So, like, I mean, in my case, I wasn't really all that badly behaved. I was 13 years old. And I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that, like, my parents both grew up in, like, farming families, and they were both Mormon, you know, and so, like, they ended up leaving the farm, and they lost that kind of social control over their children. And, you know, they became whatever and wealthy or whatever, but, like, you know, so it was just different. And so I was acting out a little bit. As much as a 13-year-old could, which was kind of just, like, not wanting to go to school. And, like, I cut my hair real short like a boy. Like, I was, like, listening to, like, skater, like, hanging out with skater boys and, like, listening to alternative music. Like, I'm, like, in a small town in southern Utah, and, like, we got this radio, and it had this awesome antenna. And we could finally get, like, alternative music stations from Las Vegas. And so, like,
wow.
All of a sudden, you know, like, there's all these, like, foreign influences in the house, and the parents just kind of freaked out. So, like,
right.
I mean, I still don't really understand it to this day, but, like, so they sent me away the first time, and it was a bishop in my community had sent 2 other girls in my neighborhood there already, and I don't know how they had that connection. But my parents basically went to him and asked, like, what do we do? Our daughter's acting, you know, not right. She's not being a good Mormon girl. What do we do with her? And, you know, I mean, so I was 13 years old, and some old people showed up in my bedroom, and they put me in handcuffs and stuck me in a car. And they were just, like, telling me, okay, we're going to take you to a different school, and you get to study Taekwondo. And I was just like, I don't want to study Taekwondo. And what's going on? Like, I'd never heard that these kind of places even existed, you know? It was just, like, super
That's interesting, at least. Like Taekwondo, huh?
Yeah, I mean, but it wasn't even Taekwondo when I got there. It was karate. And, like, they told me it was, like, beautiful and up in the mountains, and there were trees, and there weren't trees, and it was gross. Like, it was, like, you know, abandoned oil land, you know? It was just disgusting.
Right.
So, like, I mean, I got there, and I just had no idea. Like, I remember it was, like, within, like, the first 5 minutes, I remember just being like, oh, my God, like, the Bill of Rights, like, the Constitution, like, none of that applies to me. Like, I had no idea that this was possible, you know?
Right.
So,
well, right, because you're
you're
like a woke 13-year-old, right? Like, you've experienced, like, the radio from Vegas. You know what's up. You like skateboarding.
I was always a very bright and well-read child. You know, I was always for my own good. So,
right, of course.
Yeah. So, oops, you know, like, but I never read about places like that, so I had no idea they existed until I was there. So,
right, and I wonder that your parents weren't probably aware that was the environment either, I would imagine, because they were probably sold something quite different.
I don't know what on earth they were thinking, to be perfectly honest with you. And I tried to talk to them about it, and, like, I mean, you know, later, like in 2009, there was breaking news about a sexual abuse scandal at the place where I was at. And, like, it was only then that they were just like, oh, you know, maybe she wasn't lying, you know? And it's like...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like, I had to make, like, headline news, you know? But, so, I mean, it's just hard because, like, as I'm sure everybody talks about on the show, like, the parents are not allowed to, like, they're told that we're just manipulative and we're not telling the truth. And, like, so, I mean, you just suffer and there's nothing you can really do about it. So, I mean, I was there the first time for about, you know, 15, 16 months, I think, and then I got out. I graduated, and I was, like, you know, 15. And, I mean, I've been hanging out with kids that were, like, I don't know that any of us were bad at this school, but, you know, you're in this place that's, like, for bad kids, so everybody makes up stories about all the bad things they do.
Right, you got to be bad.
Oh, yeah. And then you have to, like, you read all these books, like, from Dr. B or whatever, like the Go Ask Alice, and there are all these gnarly stories that I'm pretty certain, like, were made up, you know? Like,
Sure, right.
Yeah, you know those books, right?
I don't.
Oh, my God,
can you say it again?
classics. Oh, they're
By
great.
who?
It's like Go Ask Alice. There's one about, like, Satanism.
Oh, yes.
There's, like, another one about, like, eating disorders. So, like, I don't know. Like, you can't read normal books there for most of the time that you're there. So, like, we're, like, exposed to all this, like, hype and crazy drama about teens being troubled, and people make up stories, and then, you know, I got out, and then I really was the troubled teen that I, you know, like, after hanging out with all these really troubled kids, I don't know, like, I was kind of a mess afterwards, but, you know,
well,
like,
it makes sense.
After being abused for, like, 15 months and treated like shit, like, sorry for the swear. But,
sure, that's fine. That makes sense.
And you're hanging out with kids that are 17 years old, or, you know, like, everybody's older than you, and you're a 13-year-old kid, like, you're not going to come out being normal, and you're not going to be okay just going back to high school. Like, you know, like you're going to be.
Well, no, you've been totally removed from that environment, put with a bunch of quote unquote bad kids, and the first thing you want to do when you're free is all of the things that these other kids have been telling you about.
Well, it wasn't the first. I actually tried to be really good for a while, but it was that stigma of being like the bad kid that got sent to the bad place, like got sent away, like. You know, it was like nobody was allowed to talk to me. And, like, so, I mean, the only kids that could, you know, like, and that wanted to, they were the actual bad kids. So, like, you know.
Oh, that's right, because you were in that environment.
Right.
Okay, so that makes more sense then. Because what I've also heard is quite the opposite, that these kids are, like, beelining for the weed and for the crazy, you know, the crazy friend that is happy to see them free, you know, and all of that stuff. So it's not just I'm going to continue to do what I did that deemed me a troubled teen to begin with. I'm going to prove it now.
Yeah. I mean,
like I'm going to make sure. Sure. Right. So in your particular environment, it was you were shunned in a lot of ways.
Oh, I was.
And you had no one to relate to. That alienation, and of course, they contributed to you having to act out in some ways.
Oh, and I did. I acted out bad for a second time.
Gotcha.
You know, I mean, I also had, you know, I had talked to my parents, and they promised me that they would never do that again. So, like, I was pretty. I mean, I wasn't terrible. Like, I continued to get straight A's in school. I continued to go to school. Like, I mean, but the second time, like, I got sent in, like, I did get, like, caught with, like, a microscopic bit of weed and, like, was, you know. So that was, like, so there was, like, legal things involved. And I remember, like, social workers and everyone was just like, okay, well, like, you're getting good grades in school. You're being good. Like, your room is clean. Like, they had to come to my house and do, like, checks and everything. And so they were like, why don't you go do Job Corps or something if things aren't working with your parents so well? And I was like, please sign me up. And then it was like the next day, those same people came into my bedroom and took me away again.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah.
What? Really the same people?
It was literally these same old people.
Oh,
and,
my gosh.
I remember just being so pissed that it was the same ones. I was like, no. And I was so pissed that they sent me to the same place. It was like, dude, there are hundreds of them. Why the fuck couldn't you have chosen a different one? They're going to punish me worse for being, like, the first kid sent back there, which they did, you know?
Oh, yeah. I can imagine.
Oh, yeah.
So you went back to the same place?
Yep. You know, my parents were, like, they were just, like, I mean, I hate the word hysterical, but I feel like it fits. Because, like, it just makes no logical sense. Like, I was doing fine and everything, but I wasn't going to be a Mormon girl like they wanted, you know? So,
right, that had a lot to do with obviously, sure. Those cultural standards that you had
they were like, yeah, she's going to die. We have to send her away. And it was like, I mean, I don't know about that. Like, I could have gone somewhere else, you know? But they just,
True.
You know, they didn't bother to, like, they didn't care. Like, they knew it didn't work the first time, and they didn't give a shit. Like, it was just send her back. So, yeah, that sucks. But, yeah.
So, as you kind of progressed the second time through, Was this the only other place that you were sent?
Yeah, that was the only other one.
Okay, so you kind of graduated again, I guess?
I had to, yeah. So, like,
Right.
they ended up getting, like, a court order over me, so, like,
Oh,
because
wow.
of the microscopic marijuana or whatever they found.
Uh-huh.
So, like, they got that. So it was like I could have been there forever. And, like, knowing that I had that court order was really difficult. And it was everything about the second time was weird because I already knew the rules and I already knew the mind tricks and I already knew everything about it. So it was like, it kept getting frustrated, like, staff, because, like, they couldn't break me that way, like, again.
Mm-hmm.
Like, because I already knew
Sure.
what the game was, you know? It was like, whatever, dude. Like, but
Right.
then I tried to run away because knowing of the court order and, you know, my brilliant 16-year-old mind, you know, like, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it was the dumbest runaway plan, but, you know, like, you know, I was on a college visit to see a campus, and then I ended up, like, hitchhiking and just running as fast as I could away, like,
Oh, my gosh.
yeah.
Wow.
When you're desperate
So,
and you're 16.
well, right. So,
Yeah.
so you go through again, and then what happens? I mean, you obviously come back home again.
I went to college, and actually, like, I mean, I did,
Oh, good.
yeah, so I got out, and, like, I got out on the condition that I would go to school. So, I mean, like, regardless of not really having school, like, you know, I just got on the ACTs and I got in, and it was fine, you know? Like, I've always been academically, like, gifted or something. So, like,
Right.
yeah.
And that,
you
in
know,
that,
but,
in that environment, as opposed to the high school world or that age group, probably the people in college could care less
right. Well,
about,
I made it,
you know, in
like,
some sense, like, right, that they didn't know you well enough to care about your past, or you didn't have to disclose that to them because that was something that they didn't need to know anyway.
Yeah, everybody's anonymous at the new start, right?
Right, right.
So, right, like, so, but I mean, like, I was pretty damaged, though, afterwards, you know? So, like,
Sure.
yeah, and, yeah, it was, I mean, it's, you know, I've done as well as I tried to. I mean, like, I just got a PhD last year, you know, like, I mean, but I'm not sure I would have gone into the field I've gone into without this weird experience, but, like, you know, I ended up, like,
did you notice that something I've heard kind of typically is that the kids who kind of overcome that trauma and being, you know, handcuffed and taken away, the ones that overcome it, these places and the powers that be or the people in charge will point to you and say, see, it works. And the ones that like fail to thrive, so to speak, are pointed at and say, see, though they were too bad and damaged to begin with, we tried our best.
Yeah,
Have you
that's ridiculous.
noticed that?
I know, I've absolutely encountered it. Like, so one of the reasons why I ended up studying to be an anthropologist was, like, those were, like, classes that helped me make sense of what happened, and it was like, oh, it's not like psychology where everything's like, you're a pathologized individual and it's your fault and stuff, but I got to see, like, oh, society, and, you know, like, there's these weird behavioral modification mechanisms, and of course I'm damaged, and of course I'm traumatized, and, like, so I ended up doing that, and so I ended up writing some, like, undergraduate research papers about the trouble teen industry, but I didn't call it that at that time. And then I remember, like, one of the owners of the program, like, saw it about this, like, so he was recruiting former kids on Facebook to talk about the issues. And he was like, why don't you become, like, we could pay you to do a study of ours. And I was like, oh, hell no. Like, there's no way.
Oh,
you know?
right.
Like,
But that's common too, though. No,
yeah.
right. But you hit on an interesting and important point that oftentimes the people that come back to work, or who work on staff are former students, because in a lot of ways it's such a formative time being that young that people get so indoctrinated that when they try to manage out in the world, they realize that it might be easier just to go back and work at the place that they came from.
It would be way easier if that place wasn't in the grossest of places in the world. Like, it's hideous.
Sure. But
and just,
it's
like,
so
poverty is disgusting. I mean, it's just, like,
it's so psychically damaging, though. You know, it really is. There's so much, like, what I would call cognitive dissonance that happens that it's kind of like what we were talking about before we started recording about people being really good at getting used to things. And so there is this phenomenon that happens where kids graduate and then they return as staff. And
that happens a lot, especially with, I feel, and I don't know, I used to have a Facebook group for survivors, and then I ended up closing it down because I thought it was really weird. Like, you'd have either the kids that are traumatized and looking for support, or you'd have these kids that are like the Stockholm Syndrome kids that, like, you know, want to blame the victim and, you know, just like perpetuate hate speech basically against these kids when they're acting like, hey, I'm having a hard time. Like, this is really traumatic. And yeah, so I mean, I ended up closing all that stuff down, but like, I mean, it's been really weird to watch that, you know, like the difference between certain people with their Stockholm Syndrome and they come to identify with their, you know, the perpetrators of their crimes. Yeah, I mean, it's bizarre to me, but it happens.
Right, it does. So,
yeah.
I guess, like, to kind of close it out a little bit,
sure.
I don't know, what in your estimation, like, if, I don't know, you may not have any idea, but what do you think people should be doing, regarding their kids and whether or not they may be troubled in a particular way? Like, what's the better option, you know?
Well, I think there's a number of steps that need to be taken. Number one, like the U.S. used to be a signatory for the UN Convention on the Rights of the Adolescent and Child, or the Child and Adolescent. I can't remember what order that goes in, but that should be one.
I'll look it up.
Right. I mean, basically, like most of the countries in the world have signed on to it, and it guarantees that, you know, people under the age of 18 have basic human rights and the right to autonomy and the right to education and the right to physical security and safety. Like, that would be a really good start because we have nothing like this in this country. I think there should definitely be some kind of oversight and regulation of these places because they operate without any at all. I think that, I mean, I don't know, I mean, I'm not sure that you can leave it to the state in this regard because, I mean, at least in Utah, we had a prominent state senator for a long time who owned one of these places. So, I mean, I think it needs to be up at the federal level.
Sure.
Yeah.
Because right now we have organizations like WASP and NatSap that are actually owned by the people who own the schools.
And it's powerful. They got lots of money.
You know, they're quote unquote self-regulated. Even the accreditation bodies that manage the curriculums, even those organizations are often owned by the schools that they're accrediting.
Exactly.
So, yeah, you're right. They're, in that sense, like, as far as the system itself, if they're to remain doing what they're doing in any capacity, I think it's really important that they're actually regulated and do what they say they're going to do in the brochures and online and all that stuff. You know, the testimonials.
Right. They need to give children like access to phones, you know, and have people believe them. I mean, I think so much of the culture, I mean, part of it, I feel the issue is, and what's made it so difficult as an adult survivor getting over this is like, you've been gaslit for like how many years of your life telling you that it's like your problem, your fault, and it's like, it's not, dude. Like, you know, like beating up children every day is not okay, you know, like you should have the right to health care, like basic things, you should get to go to school, like, you know, digging trenches is not therapy, you know, it's just really basic stuff, but like.
Right. There was somebody mentioned we did a response to a letter that was written in response to an interview that we had done by a former staff member. This person went public with the responses she got from her interview with us. And so we took apart his response, and one of the really weird things was his contention that we do holds, we don't do restraints, because restraint implies that you're being strapped down.
Oh, that's hard. Like, whether you're being held or whatever, like somebody's knee in your back, like in your sternum, and like you being held on the ground for hours on end. Like,
and then he called it a therapeutic hold, which is really crazy. He called it a therapeutic hold, which has no basis in reality. There's no such thing as a therapeutic hold. No, that doesn't exist.
No.
So if we can't, and at this point there isn't any reasonable regulation on these places. Like the best thing, I guess, is to, as a parent, remember to actively communicate with your child and to really listen to what they're saying, and
like those cases where that doesn't work though. Like in my case, where like I've got some really conservative religious folks, like that's not going to work. But like if we had if there was more institutional trust and like support for programs like Job Corps or something like that, which actually let teens go out and learn like a skill, and like maybe, I don't know, I haven't heard about abuses coming out of programs like that. I don't know, maybe
I haven't either. I don't think they exist. No.
It's a public program, and the students are treated like autonomous adults, and like, they're being trained for something. So like, if there were more public recognition or institutional trust about those things, perhaps that would be an option. Like,
right. I guess the other part is to, to essentially fix the real schools, and allow kids to thrive in the real schools without all the extra.
There has to be
without all the extra stuff. And right.
Yeah.
I think the
alternative for like from the nuclear family, because sometimes like we tend to romanticize the family as safe and wonderful spaces, and like sometimes they're not, and like I feel like there's a need and an institutional vacuum in terms of like what to do with so-called troubled teens that have a shit home life. Like what do you do with them? Like I feel like, maybe creating some kind of zones where they can be, either emancipated or treated with respect, that would be a good stage. But, it'd be good to do research on these issues, too, and find alternatives and different ways of dealing with it, perhaps in different countries, which I know that they exist,
Sure.
So,
when you think about it, the large majority of children don't go to these places. It's a fairly small amount. I mean, it's in the thousands, of course, but overall it's a small slice. And those kids seem to make it, by and large. Like, regardless of what they might be going through, whether their home life is good or bad, and whatever behaviors they are exhibiting, good or bad, the majority of the kids in this country, and the world for that matter, make it. And my experience was that all of the, I think I said this last night, like all of the so-called bad kids that I knew when I was growing up, and I was like kind of in those circles too, but the really, the notorious ones, they've all done quite well for themselves and grew out of it, and made a life for themselves. Right. So exactly. So I think ultimately, basically the idea that why we're doing this and what I'm really getting at is to send up a big red flag saying, please don't send your kids to these places because they're not beneficial. And
no, you're going to be like me with a kid. It's like, you know, it was 20 years I got sent away, and it's like there's so much trauma. Like, and I mean, it leaves scars. You know, it just. So why would you do that to a person? You know?
Right. Why? Indeed. Why would you do that to a person? And I think we're gonna. I mean, we could go on and on and on, but
Yeah.
you know, our listeners have a lot of patience. By the way, they.
I'm sure.
It's really great.
Yeah.
Like a lot of these interviews are listened to the majority of the way through, and
Wow.
and so that's amazing and fantastic. And I'm getting a lot of really good feedback from other survivors.
Keep up the good work. And I mean, like, I know it's kind of a hard issue to mobilize around because who cares about these, like, rich kids that, you know,
Right,
have
but they're not all of them though. Not all of them.
No,
I mean, like,
not all
kind
of
of
them.
what I was saying is that
We certainly
there
don't
are
end up rich, I don't find. No.
there are cut rate places too. Believe me, there are discount therapeutic boarding schools. Believe it or not, like.
Oh yeah.
I mean, the almighty dollar doesn't discriminate.
Well, let's keep our ears open for good alternatives then.
Absolutely. And so I'm going to just wrap it up by saying this has been another episode of the V2V Podcast Survivor Series. We're talking with Mel Grrster, and I really appreciate you coming on the show, and thank you very much.
No, thank you. See you later.